If it doesn't unnerve you a little bit to see aging and champion next to you, then you're not living in America, a country that celebrates champions like none others, celebrates being number one, getting ahead, conquering more than any country in the world, and I would argue also tries to ignore or undervalues aging in general. The fastest growing segment of our population is over the age of 65. And yet, you look around in media, social media, and otherwise, and generally speaking, your social equity starts to drop off significantly over the age of 55. I'm going to show you some tests, some tricks, some tools, some supplements, some technologies that I use in my practice to help give people a competitive advantage in the aging game. Now, two recent studies to note, and these really underscore bio-individuality. That means that when I went to medical school in 2002 and was taught to treat patients in the middle of the bell curve, meaning if just treat people as if 80% will respond, we're really throwing that out the window, largely because of specialty testing that's become available at a reasonable rate. But this is the era of modern medicine. It's here, and it's all about understanding what your body needs and what your body's going to respond to versus mine or anyone else. Now, a study out of Japan, nine patients were evaluated because they were all supercentenarians. They lived to be 110 or more. And researchers drew blood and looked at their white blood cells to see if there isn't anything extra special about their immune systems. And sure enough, what they discovered is that the CD4 helper cells, these are part of the T lymphocytes within their bodies, performed at a higher level than someone who doesn't live to be 100 or 110. Specifically, instead of just being T helper cells, these cells actually have the ability to take out cancer cells and knock out infections on their own without assistance from a primary white blood cell. Pretty exciting stuff, because what that may mean to you and I is that a new biomarker or a new target might be sitting there that in the near future we can assess and use as a guide to determine whether your anti-aging program is really working for you. The other study, which is a little bit more humorous, was they interviewed 100 patients who've lived to be 100 and asked them what those centenarians believe were the most important aspects of their health or their lifestyle that allowed them to live to be 100. And the list is pretty surprising. There are things on there like smoking 30 cigarettes a day, eating glazed donuts, drinking whiskey with your tea for breakfast, eating lots of pig's feet, divorcing and never getting remarried, kicking out my husband, regularly practicing wind down. So there are many things on that list that people think help them, including 4 cigars a day, that we would not prescribe to anyone through our practice of age management. However, why some patients are able to do that and live to be 100, 110 and others aren't is the provocative area of anti-aging medicine right now that we are stepping into and using biomarkers to understand not what your chronologic age is. That's easy. When were you born and what day is it today? But your biologic age. How old are you under the hood? So let's dive in. The first question to ask is there any best part or any good parts about aging? I mean, I've been through a lot of anti-aging procedures. I've had a hair transplant, gingival grafting in my mouth. I've used Botox and stem cells on my face. I've been through a lot of different anti-aging procedures, and aging's generally not very fun. I remember the first time I tried to jump 3 feet and I only went 2 feet and thought, I've gotten older. But I think the best part about aging is that it puts pressure on your purpose. In other words, I believe that everyone was put on this earth for a very special, unique reason, and that a lot of us spend the first half of our life using our health to try to gain wealth, often only to find out that the path that took us to that wealth wasn't really our calling. It wasn't really in alignment with our passion place. And I think that as we get a little older, it puts pressure on us to do the things that we feel like we were put on this earth to do. That's a really good thing. And if you're listening to this, I know that you're a highly motivated person, and therefore we're going to give you some information that I think will really help you build the health you need to go check off your bucket list, and maybe in the second half of life, get in alignment and contribute your verse, as Whitman would say, to this world. The very first thing I think people should do is define for themselves what it means to be an aging champion. What's enough for you? Personally, to be an aging champion looks like me being 80 years old and making turns and skiing out in Vail in the winter. And not just a couple days, but getting 30, 40 ski days in a year at that point. For you, it may mean something totally different. It might mean finishing a book. It might mean dancing with your granddaughter at her wedding. But you need to decide what that is and write that down for yourself. Then what I recommend is find somebody who's in the near term an aging champion to you. I'm 46, so the person in the middle here holding his fingers up, celebrating and smiling after coming across the finish line at the Ironman, he's my short-term aging champion, Hubie. My long-term aging champion is my Grandpa Rex. He's now 95. And I have pictures of these people up, and I try to stay in touch with them, to be inspired by them, and it helps me do the things I need to do to hopefully live a healthy life like they have. So find a near-term and a long-term aging champion. This is what I call the BD line, the birth and death line. It's a pretty sobering graphic here that makes you wonder, well, how much control do I really have over how long I live? Aren't I really genetically fated to end up just like my uncle or my dad? And the answer is, whether you're talking to the Centers for Disease Control or researchers who did the Danish twin studies, that no, you're not fated. Generally speaking, you have about 80% control based on your lifestyle. What you eat, how you drink, what you say, who you run around with, whether you sleep or not, how you move your body and exercise, all of that gives you vast majority control over your health fate. So now we're leaning in a little bit, right? Because if we have control and we know our deep emotional why, and we can put out there what our goal is for being an aging champion, we have something to work with, and it gets pretty exciting. Do you know how old you have to be in order to be considered old, quote unquote, by the World Health Organization? It turns out, according to the WHO, anyone who's 60 years of age or older is considered old. And if you're in that age group and you're taking offense to that, I'm with you. I think that word has a lot of emotional valence attached to it, and we need to be careful about how we use it. But here's an example of why being 60 isn't over the hill, so to speak. Did you know that a company started today by a 60-year-old is 2 to 3 times more likely to be successful than a company started by a 30-year-old? And that company started by the 60-year-old is 1.7 times more likely to be in the upper 0.1% of successful companies globally. So being 60 might be old by the World Health Organization, but as far as I can tell, there are lots of ways to give you the health, mental health, and physical health you need to go out there and do great things, which may include starting a company that will end up in the 0.1% of all companies globally. So you have majority control. You have a lot to contribute to our society. Now let's talk about a little bit about the tests and some of the treatments and technologies that I use in my practice. But before we jump into that, let's step back for a quick second and look at the pitfalls that I observe among people who are on the way to being aging champions, but get tripped up and never really get back on the bus. Isolation is as detrimental to your health as a sedentary lifestyle and smoking, believe it or not. There's a slight uptick in the death rate and suicide after retirement. So caution to anyone out there who's considering retirement, that first year, make sure you're prepared for that year. Loss of muscle is called sarcopenia, a 10-pound loss in your grip strength. When you squeeze that device and check how many pounds of pressure you're able to exert, a 10-pound loss in your grip strength, it equates to or correlates with a 16% increase in all causes of death. The reason for that are manyfold, but not only is muscle needed to help keep you from falling and hurting yourself, but muscle is a very important endocrine organ. It helps you control blood sugar. So you got to maintain strength by doing resistance training as you get older. Gut and digestion changes really sneak up on people. Did you know that as you get older, it's harder for your small intestine to sense the nutrients that are floating through in that river of GI fluid on its way to your colon? Yeah, you lose hydrochloric acid, which makes it harder for you to break down proteins and make amino acids available to your bloodstream so you can build neurotransmitters like the feel good hormone serotonin, or make those amino acids available to your muscle so you can maintain strength and muscle mass. We'll talk more about the aging gut and things that I recommend in just a minute. But weak risk stratification is pervasive in America, and this is an egregious oversight by medicine in general. The top three killers are heart attack, cancer, stroke, and dementia. And number three is tied for the number three spot are medical errors to the tune of 300,000 deaths in America every year. Now, half of the heart attacks that are happening in our country, we as clinicians don't understand why they're happening. The top five risk factors are controlled. Very often, the person has seen their primary care doc within the last 6 months, and yet there they are in the emergency room on a stretcher with ST segment elevations on their EKG. Their troponin I has come back high, and they're being told, you're having a myocardial infarction. I'm sorry, you're going to have to go to the cath lab. So we have some tools to help people in our practice better risk stratify so they can avoid the big one. And then the mindset is everything. Did you know that your thoughts become proteins? The better, more positive, more optimistic you think, the more likely you are to send electrical energy down your nervous system, have it convert into neurochemical signals, and tell your cells, here's a love letter, please make more good proteins today and not more destructive proteins. Your thoughts become proteins, and I believe that attitude does determine altitude when it comes to aging. Put these thoughts deep into your brain right now. You are not your parents. You're not fated to become your parents. You're not your parents. Your food is not your parents' food. Your environment is not your parents' environment. Your society is not your parents' society. And certainly, I'm here to tell you that your medicine, what's available to you through Arise MD, is not your parents' medicine. It's far better. Only 3% of traditional medicine's budget goes towards prevention. Only 3%. Well, 5 years ago, I did a talk for how to become an aging champion. And I said at that time that the blue zones, the study on aging done by National Geographic and Dan Buettner, that went around the world looking at different pockets of societies where people live to be 100 or more, that what he discovered there, the 9 core principles that I'm going to review in just a moment, really are the core of being an aging champion today, with a few caveats. One being that because of the toxic burden in our environment, we do need to take advantage of testing that allows us to understand the toxic burden that is put on our system. The other caveat is that we've really evolved when it comes to medical foods and supplements to help patients overcome some of the gut and digestion issues that happen with aging. There are more advantages that we'll talk about in just a minute. The last point to make here on longevity is this. Very rarely do I have anyone from an audience or in my practice tell me that their main goal is they want to live to be 150 or 200 or 300. Yet that's the mindset of most anti-aging scientists who are in Harvard and MIT and Mayo doing benchtop research or animal research, trying to understand why we age, how we age at a cellular level. Many of them that I listen to, they're fixated on extending life indefinitely, which is just one reflection of how disconnected researchers are from what happens in the trenches day in, day out. And practices like mine, integrative medicine and surgical practices, really do try to bridge that gap. So what are the 9 core principles elucidated within the Blue Zone study that are still the core of healthy aging today? Here they are. Movement. You got to move at least 5 minutes every hour. You need to use all 6 core body movements. The upper body, it's a push, it's a pull, it's a press. The lower body is a lunge, squat, and rotation. You need to do that throughout the day. I really believe that confining movement and exercise to a 1 hour workout in the gym is not enough. I think that your chances of living a long, healthy life and living disease-free go way up. It's the most important pill we could give somebody is regular movement throughout the day. And certainly the modern society is challenged with this sedentary lifestyle. So 5 minutes every hour minimum. You need 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise and 1,000 MET minutes per week in order to get maximum benefit from movement. We'll talk more about MET minutes a little later. Eat less. The Japanese call this the Harihachi-bu principle. Eat until you're about 80% full and then wait 15 minutes. The fullness will come, is their belief. And not overburdening your GI tract will allow your pancreas to put out the enzymes needed to break down food. It'll allow your pancreas to create the insulin needed to help regulate the blood sugar you're putting into your body, and overall be a less violent disruption of homeostasis if you simply eat less. In my practice, if we get people eating less and smaller plates and smaller glasses help with that, and we get them to increase their fiber intake, usually with supplementation, and we have them stop eating within 3 hours of bed, that's usually a 5 to 10 pound fat loss within 3 to 6 months. Not hard to do, eat less. Plant-based diet, only 10% of Americans get enough phytonutrients through vegetables and fruits in their diet daily. This is the principle of eating a rainbow. You should have a colorful plate of vegetables every time you sit down. It's very hard to do, so we often supplement people. But we also do blood testing now to look at cell-level nutrition so people know where they really are deficient. But start with plants. If you look at a plate, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, it should have at least one fist-sized serving of vegetables on that plate. Happy hour is one that is a little controversial, especially if you live in the Midwest, because 1 in 7 males is a high-functioning alcoholic in the workforce in the Midwest in America. So happy hour, yes, pausing, getting together with friends, having one drink. If your stomach is full of food, you're well hydrated, and you have that drink at least 2 hours before bed is okay with me. Purpose is one of those enigmatic things that rarely comes up in a discussion about winning the aging game and avoiding disease, but it turns out that your chances of living a long life and avoiding disease go up significantly if you're able to articulate your purpose in the second half of life. Downshifting is huge. Did you know that 20 minutes of meditation daily after 2 months, that's only 8 weeks, shows a physical enlargement of the hippocampus, the memory center in your brain? You literally see physical enlargement of that part of your brain just by meditating 20 minutes a day for 2 months. Learning to downshift, getting out of sympathetic drive, helps also reduce cortisol and protect your brain, protect your heart, and help your immune system function properly. Faith is a very interesting topic. There's a 2-decade study out there looking at people who regularly attend religious services. It wasn't specific to any one religion. And they found a 30% reduction in all-cause mortality in people who attend religious services weekly. Family is a tough one. We live in an era of intimacy at a distance, which makes number 9, finding the right tribe, the right community, the right friends, doubly important. And that is actually what the author of Blue Zones, Dan Buettner, concluded was the single most important thing you could do tomorrow to increase your chances of living a long, healthy life, becoming a centenarian. That is, strengthen your community. It's perhaps the most powerful thing you can do to change your lifestyle for the better, he said. So if you've fallen into that intimacy at a distance, not only from family, but also from friends, people you used to do sports with or do Bible study with or book club with, whatever it might be, take your vitamin C. Invest in your community. It's like a vitamin for you. That's what was. Let's talk about what's new in anti-aging medicine. And then let's get into some specifics about lab tests that I think you should run. And I'll highlight a few supplements specifically for heart health and for brain health as we move forward here. This is a wheel looking at all the different theories on why we age. Several of them have been proven to be significant contributors to aging, like mitochondrial dysfunction. That's the energy producing organelle within your cells that drives respiration. That's where oxygen is consumed and you get ATP. One thing to highlight is in regards to mitochondria. Metformin, the type 2 diabetes prescription medication, is getting a lot of attention as an anti-aging drug these days. And I think it's worth considering. If it means tighter blood sugar regulation, anything that gives you tighter blood sugar regulation is going to slow AGEs, age-related glycolic end products. The caveat with metformin as an anti-aging drug for you is that one of its mechanisms is slowing down or handcuffing the mitochondrial organ. Yeah, that wouldn't be a good thing, right? Because we just said that's energy production. But here's the upside. If you handcuff or slow down or inhibit the mitochondria a bit, the body is so brilliantly knit together that it will send out signals to increase the number of mitochondria in your cells. So now you have a greater workforce. The problem is if you're taking metformin every day, you still have, say, half that workforce being handcuffed. So, especially on days where you're going to be working out, I recommend that you take your metformin the night before and skip it that day. So take time off from metformin. Go on, take holidays once or twice a week from your metformin and try to do that with your workouts. The other one I want to point out is right next to the mitochondria. That's deregulated nutrient sensing. We talked a little bit about that. I'm going to come back in a minute and talk about the specific testing that we use to help patients understand what they're truly deficient in and why. And then we help them replenish those nutrients so that slowing premature cellular death is avoided. Now, on the right-hand side here, the red triangle is telomere attrition. Telomere is the end cap on your chromosomes, the DNA blueprint, if you will, for how you're going to produce proteins every day. We now have, for about $100, ability to draw blood in the office and measure the end caps on your chromosomes. You see, your cells get about 50 replications in their lifetime, and then they're done. They go through senescence, that's cellular death. Each time the cell goes through a replication, it divides. Those telomeres shorten a little bit. So they are protective end caps, but they're also a barometer for how much life is left in your cells. And certain exercise strategies and nutrients, astragalus is one of those nutrients that's gotten a lot of attention, are associated with lengthening of telomeres. I have one patient in my practice who, over the last 18 months, partly because of stem cell therapy, partly because of improving his immune system, he's been able to lengthen his telomeres significantly. That's pretty exciting. So you can get that test done. That's one key marker for biological age that you want to be aware of. And then lastly, before we move on, a new biologic age clock is emerging. And at the very end, I'm going to share a recent small study that uses this biologic clock to check whether or not lifestyle programs are having an effect, an anti-aging effect. And in short, this biological clock is a measure of the amount of rust, let's say, that's on your DNA. It's the number of scratches on the DNA DVD that are accumulating. And what we're finding out is that it might be a reliable marker that can be done through a blood draw, and then certain lifestyle programs appear to be able to remove some of those scratches on the DNA. See, it's not the DNA itself getting damaged. It seems that the ability to read the DNA is really what represents the first domino falling in this thing we call the aging cascade. All right, so mitochondria, make sure you're taking your coenzyme Q10. NAD may be something to consider for mitochondrial support. If you're using metformin, take a couple days off a week on that. We'll talk about how to overcome nutrient sensing issues. Get your telomeres measured and see what your biologic age is. And then be ready because some other biologic age markers are on the near horizon and are going to give us some powerful insights into whether or not we can turn back the age clock. Well, that's a lot to process, but ultimately you need to develop your own plan. You've determined what being an aging champion is for you. You've found some aging champion examples, some role models to help keep you motivated and excited. You're aware of some of the language now within the anti-aging community, and it's time to put a plan together. So you start with your goals. You need to consider certain testing. You need to be self-assessing. If you're not wearing an Apple Watch or a Fitbit that has some kind of overnight sleep quality monitoring, then go out and invest in one, put it on your Christmas list, but you need to be self-assessing. And then we're going to talk about core support issues and then some advanced or orbital support in just a moment. But here is the psychological beginning for your plan. Begin at the end. Story is the most powerful force in the universe. Your story is different than mine. It's different than any of your relatives. And what I'm going to recommend you do when you think about developing your anti-aging program is to go to your death. What do you want your eulogy to sound like? What do you want people to say? What do you want to have accomplished when you look back? And at that point, having those specific goals, now you can start knitting together your anti-aging plan. By the way, I use the same approach with a given day. People say, I really want to get a great night's sleep. Well, then here's what you need to do during the day. You've got to move a certain amount. As soon as you wake up, you've got to move. You've got to eat some food. You've got to get some light. You've got to be social. You've got to prove to your body during the day through good breathing that the nervous system can wind down. And I apply the same to good, healthy bowel function. Well, I want to have really good bowel movements during the day. Well, that means you have to move a certain amount. You've got to drink close to 2 liters of water a day. You've got to eat enough fiber, stay away from high sugar. So start at the end. And then build your dashboard. Understand what testing needs to be done to risk stratify you for the top killers: heart disease, cancer, stroke, dementia, and diabetes closely linked in there. David Sinclair is one of the leading anti-aging researchers in the world. He got paid a massive amount of money, close to $700 million, about 8 years ago for his research on resveratrol, which at that time, they thought, his lab and a big pharma who purchased his research thought that resveratrol would fool the body into believing that it was in a fasting state. In other words, it was a fasting mimicking molecule. And although resveratrol is known to be a very good antioxidant, and it was shown in rats to be able to mimic fasting, that research didn't translate into human studies. And I'm telling you that because he believes there's one central mechanism for aging. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that. I don't think that we should be expecting a magic pill anytime soon. I think that a multi-system approach is what has gotten most people to the finish line, and it is what we still need to be focused on here today. Thankfully, we're able to build a dashboard that helps us understand our bodies like we understand our cars. And I want to start with the heart because that's the number one killer, and we don't do a great job of risk stratifying the heart, but here are some tests that I want you to be aware of moving forward. And again, many of these are available through arisemd.com, our store. A cardiac calcium score looks at physically how much calcium or calcifications you have laid down in your coronary arteries. It's going to run you anywhere from $50 to $125. It's a very low radiation CT scan of your heart, and most authorities in cardiology acknowledge this as being a very useful risk stratification tool, so go get it done. The lower the score, the better. 0 is perfect. Once you start getting up close to 300, then we need to start having a more serious discussion about coronary health. But that's a look at the physical change of your coronary arteries, specifically how much calcification is there. But what you really want to know is how stable or unstable the plaque is and how well the endothelium or the blood vessels around that calcification are working. And so that's where what's called the Cleveland Heart Panel comes in. The Cleveland Heart Panel will show you two main things. One is the right modern look at your cholesterol. which includes LDL-P particle number, oxidized LDL, your triglycerides, which are kind of like the truth serum for junk food consumption, and your HDL, the good cholesterol. It will also show you the inflammatory markers that are unique to blood vessel linings. So if if you can see physically changes in the arteries, and you know what the river of blood flowing through those arteries it contains in terms of good or bad cholesterol, and then you know what kind of inflammatory signals are being put out from the blood vessel lining, now you understand what your true risk is and can make decisions about things like statins. Statins have a role. I'm not completely against statins, and you shouldn't be either. Statins help save lives by controlling blood cholesterol. But there are emerging alternatives to statins because statins rob the body of coenzyme Q10, which can have implications in your energy. Statins also give people myalgias or muscle aches in their quads. So there are negative side effects. There's also a black box warning now that statins increase your risk for type 2 diabetes. So when something like gooseberry extract or AMLA comes along in a head-to-head study against simvastatin, 20 milligrams, and shows the same LDL reduction, the same elevation in HDL, and actually showed improvement in blood pressure in those people, that is an alternative that your primary care doc should be offering to you, but probably is not. Homocysteine is an important marker because homocysteine is an irritant to blood vessel linings and increases your risk for heart attack. If you have a healthy liver and you're methylating or detoxifying well, which is dependent on enough B12 and folate, by the way, then you're able to take homocysteine and convert it to methionine and lower your risk for a heart attack. But for a lot of people, they're lacking B12, they're lacking folate, the liver's congested, whether it's just sluggish from dehydration, from alcohol consumption, taking too much Tylenol, taking other prescription drugs that are relying on the cytochrome P450 system in the liver. The reality is that most people's livers are handicapped, and therefore we see a lot of people who have homocysteines above the ideal number of 8. And that puts them at a high risk. So if you don't know your homocysteine, get it checked. If you don't know your B12, make sure you get that checked alongside your homocysteine. Sex hormones, for women, progesterone and estrogen, for men, primarily testosterone, and for both sexes, DHEA, sex hormones tend to be controversial. There's a lot of literature out there showing benefits in reducing risk for heart disease, reducing risk for brain issues like dementia, and certainly symptom reduction is the main driver for people using hormone replacement therapy. But there is literature out there as well showing increases in heart disease in people who are using testosterone replacement therapy or women who are using bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. Here's where I land on this issue. And my mentors who've been at it for 30 years, we are in agreement with this. If somebody's symptomatic and they're a male who has a testosterone near 200, free testosterone's under 10, and they have an average heart risk, they are absolutely a candidate for hormone replacement therapy, and we believe that will help support and protect their heart. If you're a woman who's having hot flashes, brain fog, difficulty losing weight, thinning hair, vaginal dryness, and you're at an average risk for breast cancer and endometrial cancer, and you're at an average risk for heart disease, in other words, the majority of people, then we absolutely believe that progesterone taken orally and estrogen applied topically is the right consideration for you. High sensitivity C-reactive protein is a measure of total body inflammation, and it's important to you because there is good data showing that a C-reactive protein above 1.0 puts you at a higher risk for a cardiac event. Once you get above 3 with your CRP, the risk for a cardiac event goes way up. So that is a true biomarker that you need to know regarding heart risk. Now, cortisol, I believe, is the most overlooked cardiac risk marker. Cortisol is that stress hormone that is put out after a minute of being stressed. So you come in, somebody gives you some really bad news, and adrenaline is dumped into your bloodstream. Adrenaline is that feeling of, that real revved up, quick hit surge that you feel. But once that starts to calm down, if you're still stressed, holding your breath, perseverating, or allowing the spinning wheels about the issue, then cortisol continues to go up, being released from your adrenal glands. And listen to this, after just 30 minutes, cortisol starts to plaque arteries, starts to cause inflammation in the hippocampus of your brain, and causes confusion among T lymphocytes. So, if that argument or that stressful moment is going beyond 30 minutes, you need to give yourself a timeout. Can we measure cortisol? The answer is yes. We measure morning cortisol in the blood. We measure 24-hour cortisol with hair or urine or saliva. Now, unfortunately, hair is no longer available as a test in the United States, but it is in Canada. So what we do is ship out the urine or saliva kits to allow people to collect their saliva or urine 4 times in a 24-hour period to measure their cortisol. VO2 max is probably the one marker that you would want. If you could only have one, you'd want to know your VO2 exercise maximum in order to understand what your overall heart health is and what your risk is. VO2 max is done on a stationary bike or a treadmill. It is only done in a lab, a sports or exercise lab. We have the association with Marquette University's Human Performance Lab, and for under $100, you can go and have your VO2 max checked. VO2 max simply means how much oxygen in a given amount of time is your body able to absorb and utilize as a measure of overall health and fitness. Blood pressure is the #1 modifiable risk factor for a heart attack. And unfortunately, it's extremely common to see blood pressure elevations in America. A couple of tips and thoughts on blood pressure. The first is that once you get up towards 70 years of age, it looks like, based on recent research, that allowing higher blood pressures is probably a good thing. It seems that it may help overcome some of the stiffening of arteries. So a 15% higher blood pressure later in life is probably a better thing to do, not really tight regulation of your blood pressure. Now, alcohol is very common in the US. We celebrate with alcohol, we wind down with alcohol, but unfortunately, alcohol is directly cardiac toxic. It irritates the myocardium. How do we know this? Well, after spring break every year in America, there is a huge increase in admissions to the emergency room for atrial fibrillation. We doctors call that holiday heart. People drink alcohol, it irritates the heart and it gives them an arrhythmia. Alcohol also over time will increase blood pressure. There's a particular drug that I've been using with success to help control blood pressure that's linked to consumption of alcohol, and that's losartan. Losartan is among the ARBs, the ARBs, and something to keep in mind if you're still struggling to get your blood pressure down. My general rule on alcohol is 1 cocktail a night is okay. As long as you have food in your stomach, you're well hydrated, which means 1.5 to 2 liters of water during the day, and you consume that beverage with at least 2 hours before bed. The dental biome, believe it or not, is listed as a legitimate biomarker for cardiac risk assessment now. A recent study looked at the selection of mouthwash and its influence on blood pressure. And it turns out that if you use an overly aggressive mouthwash and really disrupt or reduce the number of bacteria, the right type of bacteria in your mouth are reduced, then your ability to produce nitric oxide goes down. Nitric oxide, some of you guys out there may recognize that because nitric oxide is what's increased when you take Viagra or Cialis, or you eat a lot of beets. So you want high nitric oxide for good blood vessel performance, but over-aggressive management of the bacteria in your mouth with an overly aggressive mouthwash can actually lower your body's ability to make nitric oxide. This is exciting, isn't it? We're at a level of sophistication now in precision medicine where we can, and I do this in my practice, we can swab your mouth, check the bugs or the bacteria that you have in your mouth, check the mouthwash you're using, look at the nitric oxide levels in your blood through a simple test, look at your overall cardiac risk, and put all these things together in a bio-individual customized program. Really exciting. The oral or dental biome, believe it or not, isn't just important for the heart. It turns out that the dental biome has a big influence on brain health and, believe it or not, your risk for Alzheimer's dementia. There is a new drug in phase 2-3 clinical trials right now called cortexine. What this drug does is it binds up enzymes that are produced by a bacteria in the mouth. Where it binds that enzyme is actually up in the brain. So this organism, the bacteria in the mouth, called Porphyromonas gingivalis, produces destructive enzymes. Those enzymes piggyback on your white blood cells and get across the blood-brain barrier where they inhibit your brain's ability to clear out the plaques that cause Alzheimer's. Well, what this drug is going to do is flow through the bloodstream and get across the blood-brain barrier and block that enzyme from the bacteria that resides in your mouth. So oral hygiene, as it relates to heart health and your risk for dementia, is becoming a more and more important marker. Now, exercise is the most important pill we could give your brain. Why? It increases cerebral blood flow, not just while you're going through exercise, but for hours on end afterward. Blood flow to the brain is improved. If you have increased blood flow to the brain, you have increased nutrient delivery to the brain, and you have increased clearance of the metabolic waste products from the brain, one of which is amyloid plaques, a normal waste byproduct from normal cellular activity in the brain every day. But if you don't clear it out, you can build that up and you can get Alzheimer's disease. Exercise also increases the miracle grow for the brain. We call that BDNF alpha. And the benefits go on and on from there, including better sleep at night, better wave pattern, get more deep sleep at night. And if you control blood sugars through good exercise, you also help improve brain performance. Sleep is also critically important to the brain, so critical, in fact, that if you're somebody who gets less than 6 hours of sleep at night, you put yourself at a 2.4-fold increased risk for developing Alzheimer's dementia. Why? Well, because when you sleep, the brain gets a chance to catch up on clearing out that metabolic waste from the daytime. That's just one of the benefits. There's much that we don't understand about sleep, but if you're, if you are not using some technology overnight, like a Fitbit, to measure your sleep, and you're struggling with age-related changes in sleep, then by all means, get some technology at night and start assessing. Also, I want to mention here that the ability to measure neurotransmitters, that's your serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, these types of signals in the brain, is pretty easy now. There's a simple kit that's for sale on our website that you can purchase, and through collecting some saliva and some urine, you're able to assess your different neurotransmitters and put that data together with your overnight sleep evaluation from your Fitbit. And now we can plug you into one of several programs we have to improve this critical lifestyle component called sleep. Inflammation is a wastebasket term. Certainly we are all living in a pro-inflammatory environment. What do I mean by that? Well, one example would be the standard American diet, or the standard foods that are available, have far more omega-6s than they do omega-3s. And omega-6 is a fatty acid that is pro-inflammatory. It's useful in some parts, in some cases in the body, but for the most part, omega-6s are ubiquitous in our society, and they're pro-inflammatory. They disrupt the immune system. Omega-3s, on the other hand, which are a little harder to come by, small cold fish and salmon and tuna, anchovies, they would have like omega-3s in high quantities. Omega-3s are harder to come by. That's just one example of a pro-inflammatory environment. But the number one source of inflammation that, when it comes to brain health, I want you thinking about and investing some dollars to test and to treat is the gut. The gut-brain connection is just absolutely fascinating. We know that if you've got some leaky gut, it's very likely you have some leaky brain. And the way you fix leaky brain, if it's present, is you fix leaky gut. So understanding your gut health is critical if you're trying to manage some brain fog, some early cognitive inhibition, or you have already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. We mentioned cortisol and its destructive nature when it comes to plaquing arteries around the heart. Cortisol, after just 30 minutes, starts to swell the hippocampus, the memory center. After 30 minutes of the swelling, if it continues on over time, you'll get shrinkage of the hippocampus through literal neuronal destruction by cortisol. Cortisol is really only meant to be there to help you in an emergency, to fight or to run, or we say flight, away from a danger. You're not meant to exist in a high cortisol state all day long. It becomes very toxic to the brain. Not to mention, high cortisol equals high blood sugar, which means stickier cell function and early cell death. So you can measure cortisol through a blood draw, or more simply, you can purchase the Senesco kit or the Dutch kit and look at your 24-hour cortisol levels. Sex hormones are a part of most brain rehab programs. If you're deficient in estrogen or progesterone or testosterone, unless you have a very high risk profile, it's going to be the benefit is going to far outweigh the risk for you getting some hormone replacement, hormone support. At the top of that list, very simply, is make sure you know your DHEA level, DHEA. And if you're under 100, you should supplement that, and you'll probably feel better, but you'll also give the brain some neuroprotection. Fasting is a very popular topic right now. I believe in fasting, but I believe in fasting not only from food. I think that we have to fast from being hypervigilant. I think that we have to fast from backlit screens and iPads and phones and computers. You know, the only thing I can find in nature that's backlit is a leaf with the sun shining brightly behind it. It's extremely unnatural for the brain to be looking at backlit screens, and the rise of digital dementia is a real thing, not only among the youth, but among adults. Fasting for food, a couple of guidelines here. We recommend that you fast for 12 hours between dinner and breakfast the next day. We like patients to stop eating at least 2 hours before bedtime. And once a week, try to push your fasting out to 14 to 18 hours. The reason for this is that fasting 12 hours or more increases growth hormone and testosterone naturally. Growth hormone is the most potent rejuvenating chemical known to man. You are supposed to get half of that growth hormone release in deep non-REM stage 4 sleep. The other half is delivered in pulsations throughout the day, about every 90 minutes. If you're fasting, you get augmented release of growth hormone from the pituitary and get greater repair and building and anabolism. Okay, so once a week, try to push out to 14 to 18 hours, because that growth hormone release gets exponential at that point. There are tools to help you do this. There's the fasting mimicking diet, a company called Prolon, which we endorse. There are tablets. Fast Tonic is one of them that makes it easier to stretch out your fasting. A couple of nootropics to consider. Nootropics is the word nootropics. Bacopa monnieri is an adaptogenic herb. It means that it helps you adapt to stress. It helps control the release of cortisol from your adrenal glands, but it also is a nootropic. It helps the brain clear out plaques and debris and support the neurons in the brain. In addition to holy basil at about 3 grams a day is another very nice adaptogenic herb to help your central nervous system adapt to stress during the day, but also support the brain directly in not only cleaning up debris, but supporting the neurons. RG3 is a nasal spray. It goes by the trade name Synapsin. It's a prescription-only product, and it is a ginseng extract that is being used by the NFL for brain rehabilitation programs. It's rising in popularity for those health professionals outside of the NFL because it's directly able to reduce inflammation in the brain, which usually helps people feel more focused, less irritable, and have better energy. And then NAD is a supporting molecule for energy production in the mitochondria. NAD is available by IV. I've had several patients do this. It's about $800 to have it done, so it's not cheap. You can feel a little flu-like for a couple days afterwards, but then people tend to feel better. Just be aware that NAD taken orally is not very effective and is a waste of money, in my opinion. NAD, however, is going to soon be available intranasally, And I believe there's big promise in that intranasal delivery of NAD. A quick mention about some new diagnostics for the brain. We are finally measuring the organ that we're trying to treat when it comes to the brain. Forever, we have been trying to treat the brain without actually looking at it like we do ultrasounds of the liver or echoes of the heart or chest x-rays of the lungs or a small bowel follow-through of the GI tract. We're finally doing MRIs of the brain before people have major problems, and we're able to put it into a software called NeuroQuant. A person who is not headed towards Alzheimer's dementia will have a 1% decrease in the size of their hippocampus, the memory center, every year. Somebody who is headed towards Alzheimer's dementia has an accelerated decline in the hippocampal volume at about 5% a year. So you can get a baseline measure of your hippocampus size and also look at other regions of the brain. And then in a US FDA approved database is now available to look at age-matched controls for your brain size and tell you, relatively speaking, what your risk is for disease. And then this is a repeatable study. So you can enter into a program, a brain rehabilitation program or anti-aging program, and recheck the brain. And literally, we mentioned meditation before, see volumetric changes in your brain. Pretty exciting stuff. The other test that we do in conjunction with NeuroQuant, which is very easy, is called BrainSpan. BrainSpan is something you can log on right now yourself directly. You don't need a doctor, and order a kit for yourself. That kit will allow you to take a drop of blood and check your omega-3 to omega-6 index. It will also give you a link to an online neurocognitive test so you can get your own baseline records for your brain performance. I really think health begins in the gut. It's where 40% of our energy consumption is, it's where 70% of serotonin is produced, and it's where the vast majority of your immune system lies. And many of us, even if we haven't had heavy stress in our lives, or had GI infections, or had irritable bowel disease or inflammatory bowel disease, we do have age-related changes. The key ones to be aware of would be a reduction for most people in hydrochloric acid production from the stomach, which makes it harder to break down proteins to make amino acids available for absorption. It also makes it harder for your body to metabolize and make B12 available. So those are just two examples. But as the food goes through the river of the GI tract and gets down to the small intestine where nutrients should be absorbed, it turns out that the villi, the little finger-like projections into the small intestine, are less efficient at sensing and absorbing those nutrients, which gives a lot of older folks a relative nutrient deficiency. In fact, most authorities in anti-aging medicine see malnutrition or undernourishment of the body as one of the core reasons for accelerated aging. You may say, well, I'm eating whole foods, I'm taking lots of vegetables, I don't eat junk food. Yes, and that's excellent. But if you're not breaking those down, digesting and absorbing those nutrients properly, in other words, if you're just pooping out a lot of that nutrition, then you're still at a cell and organ level going to be malnourished. So what we do as a part of our medical nutrition evaluation is have you collect a stool sample and do a comprehensive gut evaluation. That stool sample shows us how much inflammation is in your gut and what kind of inflammation. Is it the kind that comes from reacting or having an allergic reaction to food? Or is it the kind that's more associated with inflammatory bowel disease like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's? That stool analysis also tells us whether or not undigested or unbroken down proteins or fats are coming out in your stool, which would be a clear sign of either overfeeding yourself fats or a serious digestion issue that may warrant some sophisticated digestive enzymes. In addition, the stool analysis shows us whether or not you're harboring infectious organisms like parasites or yeast, but it also gives us an idea of the good versus bad bacteria in the microbiome of your gut. So a lot of information in that stool collection. Now, if we know what's coming out in your stool, and we have a sense of how inflamed you are in the gut, the 24 feet of small and large intestine, and we know based on your journal what you're putting in, then what we really want to know in the middle is, how much of those nutrients are actually getting to the cells of your body. And thankfully, in this modern era, we now have a test called SpectraCell, which is a blood draw that looks at the nutritional level within your white blood cells. What could be better? You want to know your cell level nutrition, but if there were one system that I would want to make sure is well nourished, it would be my immune system. That keeps my white blood cells working well to take out potentially cancerous cells. That keeps my white blood cells working well to take out bacteria and viruses within my body. So a medical nutrition program can be geared for you that gives you a specific sense of what your body's missing. And then the last piece of that medical nutrition evaluation is what's called a continuous glucose monitor. This is a tag that goes on your arm painlessly and through an adhesive sticks to your arm for anywhere from 10 to 14 days. While it's on, it measures your blood sugar every 15 minutes. And we have patients take a photo food log during those 10 days, and then we compare the blood sugars to what you ate, what you drank, how well you slept, and whether or not you exercised. And then we have all this information to make a very specific program. More importantly, very specific pointed changes for you that we now know specifically are needed for your body, and it makes treatment and correction highly efficient. Did you know that hemoglobin A1C, a blood marker that's thought to be a 3-month average of overall blood sugars and is used by primary care doctors to evaluate you for type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes? Did you know that now that we have continuous glucose monitoring, that A1C might be missing up to 15 to 20% of type 2 diabetics? I'm going to put the exclamation point on an anti-aging lifestyle with this black and white bar graph. Yes, it's about peak exercise, but my greater point is if you look at this graph and you see that CV standing for cardiovascular mortality, that's represented by the black bar, and you see in quartile 1 or Q1, that bar going from 4.0 down to 2.0, that's a 50% reduction in your cardiovascular risk in doing what? In going from a casual mowing of the lawn level of exercise to a level of exercise that's the equivalent of carrying a bag of full groceries up a flight of stairs for 150 minutes a week. Just that increase in your level of intensity for exercise can reduce your cardiovascular risk by 50%. Now, if you can't look at that data and find a way to get that level of exercise, just 150 minutes of moderate exercise a week, then you really have to ask yourself how much you love yourself and how committed you are to the dreams of your future and to achieving what you believe you're here on earth to do. This is, to me, the most important starting point for all of us. This data that is available to us about exercise, and it's 150 minutes a week, moderate exercise. Now, if you push up into quartile 5, you're absolutely right. You say, Dr. Miller, but if you go to Q5 over there, my hazard ratio comes down from 4 to 1. That's true. That level of exercise is jumping rope for 150 minutes a week, and that is available to you, and the benefits are there. In between, it's a little bit suspect, right, on what the advantages are. But the other parameter that I want to add to this exercise discussion, because it's associated with an increase in memory and brain performance, is 1,000 MET minutes per week. And you can look up METs, M-E-T, to see what levels are equivalent to the type of exercise you do. But as I said, Q5 is a MET of greater than 12. That would be equivalency of jumping rope. So in that case, a jumping rope level of exercise would be MET of 12. You need to multiply that by time in a given week in order to get 1,000 MET minutes. It's that simple. So we have, in this modern era, some tools, some tests, and some insights that are really exciting. They are leverageable, And one of those is a biologic age marker, a blood draw that can be done in addition to telomeres, which I already mentioned, the end caps on your chromosomes. It looks like we are developing a new marker that will help us understand how many scratches are on your DNA DVD. That's the analogy we're using here. So just last month in Nature, this study came out showing 9 healthy volunteers who were put on DHEA, HGH, which is human growth hormone, metformin. They were also put on zinc and vitamin D, by the way. And they had this blood marker looking at the number of scratches on their DNA. Then they were put on this program for 6 months, and they rechecked that marker for DNA damage, and they found a reduction in the DNA damage equivalent to turning back the biologic clock 2.5 years. So if you were 50 years old, this program turned back your biologic age to 47 and a half. Now, this is 9 patients, and anecdotal evidence in plural is not necessarily leverageable data, but stay tuned because things are happening rapidly, and this may soon be available to you as another guide for whether or not your efforts truly are paying off under the hood, so to speak. So the best really is yet to come. Your attitude does determine your altitude. You've got to find your why in the second half of life and amplify that. Build your vision board, your dream board. Find your aging champions that can rally and excite you. Remember, vitamin C, according to the Blue Zones and Dan Buettner, is the most important vitamin you can take. That's vitamin community. And then build your lab dashboard. Flying blindly doesn't make sense anymore in the year 2019. You have so much data available to you through practices like my own. You don't even have to be a patient to buy some of these kits. You got to move. You got to move often. You got to move through the 6 core body movements, and you have to adapt. Eat with the non-dominant hand. Take different routes to work. Challenge yourself to learn a new skill, a new musical instrument, a new language. Force yourself to adapt. Do hot and cold plunges. Fast and then feast. And then sleep, sleep, sleep. There's a new device I want to make you aware of. It's called Dream, D-R-E-E-M. That not only monitors your brainwave pattern at night, which I think is the best assessment of sleep, but believe it or not, it also marks when you are in deep sleep and pulses energy to your brain to amplify the benefits of deep sleep. The number and types of technologies available to us in the modern era is just awesome. Supplements matter because of age-related decrease in nutrient sensing, and we both measure first what you're deficient in and then put you on the right program and then measure again to verify. And then we really do need to take responsibility for our own health. Only 3% of the budget's being spent in primary care to help you prevent disease. And with the limited amount of time and the lack of resources within the system, you have to build your own medical record. You need to buy some tools that will help you self-assess, including a Fitbit for overnight monitoring, including a blood pressure cuff and a blood sugar device, a glucometer at home, are all part of a responsible anti-aging program in the modern era. Now, I believe every person listening to this is a unique, living, breathing, purpose-filled work of art, and you were put in the gallery of Earth for a unique reason, and we love helping people light and frame themselves to the best way possible. And Wayne Theobald represents what I think is a beautiful example of an aging champion because he is a living, breathing work of art who is literally producing art, even at the age of 98. Beautiful paintings. His paintings are sought after enough that he just had a big exhibit out west. He's an aging champion, and he's an inspiration to all of us. Whitman said that that we are here to contribute our verse, all of us, in his poem, "O Me, O Life." And I think the best part about aging is that we're not done yet and that we get to do it in the year 2019 with all of the technologies and tests available to look under the hood and first know what my true state of health is now, set goals for myself, and then be able to measure my program's benefits as I move forward. I'm Dr. Adam Miller from Arise MD. My email is adam@arisemd, ADAM, at ARISEMD.com. If you have questions, please go to our website, arisemd.com. Our phone number is 414 386 2600.